Thank you very much. And at this point, we're going to call the meeting to order. Mr. Vogel, will you please take an official roll call?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Senator Champion. Senator Champion. Ms. Dawson. Ms. Dawson. Mr. Esme. Mr. Esme. Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans. Mr. Geffen.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson. Mr. Hanson. Ms. Huntley.
Present.
Thank you. And welcome to the task force, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Irvin. Mr. Irvin. Mr. Kammer.
Present.
Thank you. Lieutenant Knox.
Present.
Thank you. Judge Kulik. Judge Kulik. Senator Matthews. Senator Matthews. Ms. Mattson. Ms. Mattson. Representative Mueller.
Present.
Thank you. Inspector General Modi. Inspector General Modi. Mr. Page.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Robertus. Ms. Robertus. Representative Robbins.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Sandoval. Mr. Sandoval. Judge Satterback. Judge Satterback. Ms. Sherlock. Ms. Sherlock. Mr. Tatum.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Williamson.
Present.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Chair, 9 of the 23 members are present. Quorum is not unfortunately present at this time.
We do just a quick
Chair.
ask if there are other people who are here that didn't have their names read. I know more people popped in. I don't know the procedure for that, Mr. Vogel, but could you inquire on that?
Certainly, just informally, Ms. Dawson, I see you popped in. Are you present?
Yes, I'm present. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And was anyone, did anyone else come in as I was?
Yes,
Miss
Will.
K-
I just
Miss-
admitted to more.
Oh, okay.
And Ms. Kaser is raising her hand.
Oh, Ms. Kaser, you're present?
I'm present. Yes, thank you.
All right. Is anyone else, did I not call anyone else?
Will, if you didn't catch it, I admitted Ms. Robertus and Representative Robbins.
Okay, Ms. Robertus, you're here?
Present.
All right. Then in that case, Mr. Chair, the revised count would be 12 members present and a quorum is present.
Thank you,
Is-
Mr. Vogel.
All right.
At this time, I'm going to determine whether or not the meeting minutes from our last meeting from January 28th are up on the task force website and have been posted. Does anybody have any corrections, amendments, changes at all to the meetings that were posted? If so, please identify yourself now. Seeing nobody raising their hands or raising any issues, we're going to adopt the meeting minutes from the January 28th meeting. Mr. Vogel has a couple things to announce too at this point before we move forward.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Elizabeth Huntley. Just by way of introducing her, she's the new member of the task force, recently appointed to represent the licensing boards. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you'd like to invite her to introduce herself or what.
I would. I think that's appropriate this time. Ms. Huntley, if you could just give us, just we just want to see your face, hear your voice, and welcome you to the group.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Great to see all of you, and a privilege and an honor to be here. I work for the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice. I serve as the Deputy Director. I've worked for the agency for a number of years, both in complaint review and licensure, and now I'm doing more administrative work. So happy to be here and hope I can provide some helpful contributions.
Well, thank you so much for being here and your dedication to this issue. Appreciate you and appreciate your time. Mr. Vogel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other thing I wanted to bring to the members' attention was some changes we've made to the task force website. I also sent out an email about this earlier this week. So I'm here on the homepage of the task force website, Task Force Home. Here we have the meetings tab where you can see the page for these meetings and for the subcommittee meetings. But if we are here on the homepage of the task force website, we can scroll down and we've added language soliciting public comment. And a web form where people can turn in their comments. We've deliberately written to this language to be very broad, soliciting comment from basically anyone who's had experiences connected with the human services background study process. So people who've been through the process as subjects, employers, that sort of thing. But please, if you have any feedback about the language here, just let me know. And likewise, the web form has language soliciting people's people to put their contact information if they're interested in us following up, potentially reaching out to have them speak at one of these meetings, that sort of thing. But otherwise, submissions are by default anonymous. So somebody who does submit will need to choose to put their contact information in their submission for us to know who it was. But I just want to advertise this to all the members. I know that that some members have members of their interpersonal networks who were very interested in reaching out and sharing their stories. So if you do have anyone like that who you know, or if you receive that question, please direct them to the task force website page and to this button here. So thank you very much, members and Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vogel. And I want to reiterate and reinforce that the importance of trying to get this out into the community. You know, it's hidden a little bit on a web page. So the more that we can distribute it to folks, I think the better feedback we'll get. We've already started to receive some stories, and I think they're going to be very helpful as we move forward. With that said, we're going to start today's full meeting with a presentation from the Department of Human Services. I confess I don't know who's doing the presentation today for the department, but hopefully one of them knows. Oh, Miss Davis is going to do it. I see her hand and her bright smile. And so I will turn it over to her and the department at this time. Thank you so much, Ms. Davis, for presenting to us today.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you to all of the task force members present this morning. And let's see if I can pull this up. Harry, would you be pulling up the presentation?
Yeah, I will get the slides up and I can share. Just 1 second while I get that pulled up. I am not, apologies. My colleague Chris Zemple was unable to cover this morning. And so I have not shared on Zoom. Will, do you have a copy of our slides? Would you be able to
share
yes. that for Don? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It is a brief presentation for you all and is in follow-up to a request that we received just to provide some insight on the data that we've prepared and have shared thus far. And so some of the information you guys have seen, but it's going to be shown to you in more of a process-oriented visual that reflects the work of the Background Studies Division. And so we can go ahead to the next slide. Will, thank you. All right, so this slide, I'm going to start at the top. It is an overview of the data that has been completed and shared with you all. So we're starting with the count of distinct persons that were eligible and disqualifying determinations that were provided by provider type and also by race and ethnicity. So again, just for acclimating your eyes to sort of this color scheme, even it's taking up a pretty large view on my side of the screen here. But the green actually represents sort of the persons, the determinations, I'm sorry. Blue would represent the individuals or the distinct persons. And then there is a color scheme of purple that will eventually show up here too. And that is actually going to represent the offenses. And so as we start at the top, again, information you guys have already seen, I believe, that has been completed through the first data pool that we've provided. And I know that has been shared with the subcommittee. But starting with the total determinations coming into the department over that period of 2018, 2019, moves down to who the distinct persons are. 367,790. And then again, from there, a breakout into two categories, the eligible and disqualifying. And so as you'll note, there also is additional drop-down boxes for DHS, the Department of Health, and then also the Department of Corrections, giving you some percentages. And just in case we've got somebody that might want to do some math on us with those percentages, because they are not going to add up to 100%. Those are representative of unique person counts. And just a note that there can be one person may have multiple agencies that they work for and may have different determinations with that one provider that has multiple licenses. So it's not going to be an apples to apples comparison on the percentages that walk it back up to 100%. As you see, the eligible and disqualifying will be at the 100% mark. So I just want to notate that. The disqualifying then moves over into another bracket to the right of the screen, which is our overview of the data, which was part 2 that was provided. And that created sort of a lay of the land for count of distinct persons by background study with risk of harm determinations. And it also yielded provider type and race and ethnicity in that report. And from there, as you guys will see, we're really talking about in the overarching scope of the determinations that come in and are processed through our background studies division, there really is like 3.5% of those that we're talking about that have the disqualifying factors. And so those would then move into another category where we're showing how many are, in terms of percent, are moved through for either no requirement of supervision. There's 37% of those may be required, are required for supervision, and then also immediate removal. And so again, just wanting to make sure, and some points on this that I would sort of share with you all, just in terms of insights and discussions that we've had and looking at some of the data right alongside of you all, is that what we can tell from this is that there are about 30% of the individuals who are able to seek a set aside. But whether they have or have not, we'll have more data pulled as we move in through the next sets of data to be able to show a deeper dive. But it is more than 30%. So wanted to share that, and we can move to that next slide. And yet another visual, and here's where that more of the purple comes into play, where we're talking about offenses. And so with this particular report, again, starting at the starting point of disqualifying determinations, you see that figure there, which represents 5%. That is a count of disqualifying crimes and conduct by disposition type, years of disqualifying periods, and then also crime and conduct, again, by race and ethnicity, that we're providing some of that demographic data for you guys to dig into. And again, this is in progress. So we know right now we've been able to sort of lay out in terms of the data that we're going to be providing to you all as that next deeper dive, the total crimes and conducts and then what those dispositions are. And so we've laid them out here with a number of different categories. And then a couple of points or insights to share with regard to this particular side of the slide is that we know that the forthcoming data sets will represent more information on disposition types, the offenses, and then the years disqualifying. Let's see, we'll go to the right of the screen here, and the overview for that fourth part of the process. And again, I think our goal in sharing the data in this way is to really sort of start at sort of the universal level of our data, and then start to build in the pieces to build more of a comprehensive look at each category or data set that we're providing to you, so that you can bite into it and determine where you want to take a go at. But this is the count of determinations with requests for reconsiderations by outcome. Again, this time we're also folding in the race and ethnicity, but it starts to build on where an individual may or may not move through the reconsideration process. And then from there, how our staff are using various tools that we have in conjunction with statute to make their determinations based on risk of harm. And then whether or not those are either set aside as you follow the flow chart there, or whether or not those determinations have been made based on correctness and whether they're rescinded or upheld. There are still other ways also, even as you look down toward the bottom, and I can't see it from my screen because of the largeness of the readout here on the visual, but there are still other opportunities even beyond what we have laid out here in the green and the blue and the purple for individuals to move through reconsideration or request appeals through administrative hearings or even through the Court of Appeals. And again, I'll just sort of make reference to the 245C.16, and that is going to be where we have all of our risk of harm factors that are used. And again, our staff are also conforming to that and utilizing tools that we have in that correlate to what's in 245C.16 to get to those risk of harm assessments that we're doing. Slide. So now we move into more of sort of a summary, which basically recaps a couple of the slides that we've shared, the first, second, and third slide there. But 5% of determinations that have been completed in 2018 and 2019 have resulted in disqualification. From that number, you also saw that 3.5% of those persons, those distinct individuals who received a determination, were disqualified. Again, just a reminder that one person can have multiple disqualifying determinations, especially if they're affiliated with a provider, with multiple providers, or if a provider has more than one license that individual may be working under. There's also 20% increase in the number of distinct persons from one year to the next with regard to the determinations, and then 70% increase in the number of distinct persons from 2018 to 2019 with disqualifying determinations. We attribute that those two figures there. I will share that in 2018 is actually when I came on into background studies myself. That year was a year we had taken in new study types. The child care study types, provider types were very new with the federal requirements that had come through the Child Care Development Block Grant Fund. And so we had started originally, I think child care centers was the only provider type within that cluster, and that expanded to not only the child care centers, but also licensed family child care providers, legal non-licensed child care centers, certified child care centers, and temporary agencies that work with child care providers as well. So we attribute some of that increase to not only new providers coming on board with DHS, but then also statutory changes at the state and federal level that may have been moved into position or enacted at that period, which then may have caused some changes in terms of how we're processing through the laws. So if you take note of those two, that 20% and 70% increase, that is what we're attributing some of that increase to. People of color represented 26% of all distinct persons with a determination completed in both years, and then 41% of those persons were distinct with disqualifying determination in that same period. And then just also to kind of highlight that there are 3 service categories during that period, 2018 to 2019, which are home care providers, home and community-based service providers, and then also what we call PCPOs, personal care provider organizations, that were really the substantially large provider classes that we were working with during those 2 years. And they represented 52% of all distinct persons that had a completed determination during that period. To the next slide. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so this one providing just a little bit of a couple of insights here from that second batch of data on the report that was provided as overview 2 for risk of harm. As you can see, 30% of all disqualifying determinations had more than one disqualifying crime or conduct. And as was mentioned and referenced in one of the earlier slides, you can have one person have more than one type of disqualifying crime, one or more dispositions. 30% of those distinct individuals that we served had a disqualifying determination and were allowed to work with no supervision. 37% were allowed to work under supervision during their reconsideration period based on their risk of harm analysis.
Or culture where regulators, providers, stakeholders.
All right, and then the last bullet point here to share was that 10% of distinct white persons with a disqualifying determination were ordered immediately removed, compared to about 12% of distinct persons of color with disqualifying determination based on their risk of harm analysis. And throughout all of our data that we've provided thus far, people of color, in terms of this, these slides here today, are reflective of all of the groups that start with African American, Asian Pacific Islander, and Native American categories. So they're all sort of grouped in together in terms of for this slideshow today. I think that's pretty much it. If others have any questions, we know that there's more detail and data sets that are forthcoming in the very near future here. And so we look forward to being able to take a deeper dive and move through some of those next sets of data with you all.
Can I ask you a question, Ms. Davis? Just in terms of language, when you would, and with the presentation, you talk about a determination. That's not a determination of a disqualification. That's just when the department has reviewed the case and completed its background study, correct?
Yeah, and they are making a determination of either eligible or disqualification.
Okay.
But
and
yes, that's a part of that process.
Okay. So in slide 4, you talked about having an increase in background studies of distinct individuals by 20%. Slide 4, I believe. But the number of distinct persons with a disqualification went up by 70%. I would just assume that if you had 20% increase in background studies of distinct individuals, you would go up. The disqualification rate would be close to 20%, but it's 70%. Any indication as why?
Well, and it goes back to that same unique perspective that we shared earlier on. There are enhanced disqualifications that come from childcare, from the federal enhanced childcare studies. There are a number of different things that we can attribute to that. I think we should be able to pull some of that information out to be able to provide and share. But again, when you think about one individual can be affiliated with multiple providers, or one provider that might have additional licenses in like a Head Start program, maybe one program within a provider that also has other types of childcare, licensed childcare services, or a children's residential facility license. And so you may have a provider who has multiple licenses with one individual, and that one individual can have more than one disqualifying determination based on where they are working within maybe that provider or multiple providers.
And just hold my hand through this. I thought when we talked about distinct persons, we were talking about a single individual. So if that individual applied to 4 different places, it would still be one distinct disqualification, right?
Well, yes, the disqualifying determination that number is always going to be higher. It will, even if it will always be higher. It will never be apples to apples. It's probably more of a good analogy to sort of use to describe. It will never be one for one. There will be cases that it is 1 for 1, but if you have, again, if you have a provider that has multiple license types or an individual that is going in and is affiliated, the determinations go with the program.
Okay. Well, thank you. And let's open this up to the full group for any questions for Ms. Davis or the department. Mr. Tatum?
No, I heard you guys speaking about schools. The name on there. Okay, there we go. Dawn Davis. Yeah. Yeah, I was with the schools there. How far does the background study go? And like you said, in school, just asking the question. This is just putting it out there. Like, okay, if I was washing dishes in the school, would I be have to take a DHS background study just to wash dishes at the school? Would that be?
It depends on what your facility license is, or what your what the provider's licensure.
Kids working. I mean, kids going to school there. I'm in an environment where children are, at the school. So would that be effective? If I had a criminal record, would I be eligible, and would that fall into the DHS as well?
I think the biggest part is that depending upon what your what the risk of harm analysis and the disqualifying factors are, as those are moved through, again, people may be disqualified. And what I think where we get stuck at with that 3.5% is that we know that there are people who are eligible or able to seek a reconsideration. So even if you may have something that appears to be a disqualifying determination, it shouldn't stop you from moving forward to request a reconsideration. We don't do and that's one. So the second part of an answer to your question is we don't necessarily do background studies for Department of Education, but I can think of something similar would be if there is a children's residential facility or a program of sorts that is inside of a school.
Horizon or something, you said? Something like that, or?
I'm not really, I can't really say right off the top of my head, but I do know that just think of it in this, if you think of it in this way, it will be based on whatever that provider's licensure is, and that will all toggle back to 245C. It is laid out what type of facility licensure that provider entity has. And so that's what our staff within the background studies division is going to follow, is what has been created. And, I just also would share to Mr. Tatum that we know that, it's important for us to share in our background studies division that background studies at DHS is downstream from what we all would know is sort of, sort of judicial system or the criminal justice system, laws, processes, and policies. We happen to be on the downstream of that. And so while we know that those things tend to create they could create some sensitivity or disqualifications and things where risk of harm analysis and other things that we utilize could come into play, it is all down, we're downstream of that, right? We're down on the downstream.
On the downstream meaning?
So when we see the data that when you look at the data that we presented in terms of whether it's looking at demographics, whether it's looking at, again, that 3.5% of the larger 96% of whom are eligible 3.5% represent those who are disqualified. And so I use that only to say, just to kind of put that in the whole universe of perspective here, is that DHS's background studies is just one small component of a larger sort of the things that occur for an individual at maybe the judiciary, in the judiciary system, or also the criminal justice system.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Ms. Kaser, and then after that, we'll go to Representative Robbins. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question, and maybe for Ms. Davis, and maybe this is forthcoming in some of the data. I noted that you said, of that 3.5% that are disqualified, about 50% are disqualified from the Department of Human Services. Is there going to be further breakdown of like which programs? Because I know that they oversee many of those programs in the data.
Yeah, I think there can be further breakdown. I think I did note too that on one of the slides that the 3 provider types that typically are the during that period at least that are the largest. It's already in that data set 1, but it's home and community-based providers, PCPOs, the personal care provider organizations, and then there was a third one there that are reflective. But yes.
Thank you so much. Representative Robbins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Davis, for your testimony. It's really helpful. So I wanted to go back, if you don't mind. I have it on my phone, but it might be helpful to call up that risk of harm slide. If you don't mind.
Yes.
I can't see on my phone the page number. Oh, it's slide 5. There we go. So I'm new to this area, so I just wondered if you could walk me through this a little bit in more detail. So similar to Chair Giffen's question, so 30% have a disqualifying determination. That determination is that they are not able to serve due to risk of harm. Could you just lay that out for me?
Yeah, so 30% of all disqualifying determinations had more than one disqualifying crime or conduct. And so what that, if I looked back at that previous slide, that more colorful slide that had the disposition, some of the disposition types there, what that is sharing is that you could have one person, which we do in a lot of cases, that have more than one disposition type of crime or conduct that we're looking at. So it's not just sort of one to one. There are many individuals that may come with more than one, and they can have more than one disqualifying disqualifier in the determination.
Perfect. And then if we could go back to that other one. So when it says 10% of white persons with a disqualifying determination were immediately removed, and 12% of persons of color. Could you talk more broadly about, so they were already employed, they were already serving, and then for some reason, like how did they get to be serving before they got to be immediately removed? How in the process did that work? And also if you could talk more about, how often that occurs, that someone has to be removed from working because of something that's discovered. And if there's any additional data on that, like longitudinal data, like how often in 10 years does that happen? Or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah. So the risk of harm analysis would help us to determine whether or not they can work during the reconsideration period. Not whether or not that they would be eligible for a set aside. And so under 245C16, where we have sort of the risk of harm information laid out and those different factors there that we move through and rely upon to make some determinations. The commissioner also, DHS's commissioner also has has a discretion, has a responsibility for either supervision, requiring supervision, no supervision, or immediate removal of an individual. And so that information could come back in if the person has a rat back, perhaps they committed another crime or were convicted of another crime while they were working, because we do have rat back services, which is real-time information that we receive as a study subject is already has already undergone a background study with a determination with us. So it could come at many points, not just at necessarily at the start of a job. The person began working or went through a reconsideration process, they were allowed to work. But then now as information was reviewed during that reconsideration process, as an example, that could be the point at which they're asked to, the providers asked or informed that individual needs to be immediately removed. So there are a number of different.
Right. So is there any way to look at that data of more granular way? I'd like to understand who's removed and for what purpose.
I think that
and how often that occurs.
I'll take that back with me. I think that there is some information that is forthcoming in this next series of data sets that we're producing. So there is more data to come out, which will include the disposition type, disqualifying year periods.
Okay, perfect.
What we're looking back at.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
We're going to move on a minute. I did want to make just a couple points, and Ms. Davis, I certainly will give you the opportunity to respond. When I originally look at that 3.5, it seems like a kind of a heartening number that most people are passing. I think one thing that doesn't show up in the data, and I don't think this is, data is data, is that there are a lot of people that get advice not to pursue careers based on the statute itself, looking at their criminal history or their involvement. So the number is lower. And I also think that, like, if someone has a disqualification and they apply in 2015, and they're told based on their 5th degree possession, which is a felony, that they have a 15-year disqualification, they're not going to be in any data sets again for quite some time. And the other number that I think is important to understand too is that 37% that are allowed to work with supervision. Oftentimes, in my experience, the employers aren't willing to do that. Some positions just certainly don't. Like if you want to be a PCA, you can't really work with supervision. And the supervision, as I've always understood it, is usually kind of within sight or sound of the individual, which is a really close level of supervision. So, and then this is just anecdotal, and again, I'll let you respond, is that a lot of employers just financially can't do that. So even though technically they're allowed to work, they can't, because it doesn't require them to work. The employer just can't do it. And I don't want to make those comments without opening it up to you, Ms. Davis, to respond. So I will certainly let you respond.
No, yes, I'm, as an individual, as a professional, as a person who has worked in previously to my role here at in government, have worked in nonprofit. And so I am aware that that does become a challenge or a financial issue for providers in terms of requiring supervision, when most of the provider entities may be nonprofit organizations that are relying upon funding from philanthropy and other sources. So I'm aware of that, like I said, professionally, personally, as well, that is a challenge and can be a challenge for providers.
Thank you. And I see Mr. Irvin's got his hand up. And Mr. Irvin, you always have good things to say, but we're going to hold you to about a minute or two, or Mr. Vogel's going to give me an evil eye. So I can't handle it. So certainly, Mr. Irvin, please let us know your thoughts.
Okay, 2 quick questions for Ms. Davis. Ms. Davis, good to see you. Thank you, Chair Geffen. I know that the statute in 245C17 says that the department will respond to an initial request within 3 days. And we used to almost always get a reply back in 1 or 2 days. And now we don't even get a more time needed response back, sometimes for weeks. And that leaves us with candidates in the lurch. and then we lose the candidates altogether. So if you could comment on that. And then my second question is relative to the emergency studies. We hire over 200 people a year. We've probably got 400 people in the 2 years we've used emergency studies that we're now going to be required to go back and initiate new studies. And it would seem to me that the risk of harm is the proof's in the pudding. If somebody has worked for us for 2 years, I'm just curious your thoughts on why we have to go back and initiate a new study just so that you can go out on a national level. It's going to be a lot of cost, a lot of time, and hopefully not a lot of removals.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Irvin?
Yes.
It's good to see you as well. To your first point about the notice requirement in statute, we do have a requirement by which we are to respond within 3 days, providing the notification of the status of the study to both the provider and the individual. And to my knowledge, that is still happening, that we are meeting that requirement with, even as you mentioned, sort of more time is needed notification. If that is not occurring in any instance, I would certainly invite you or anyone from Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge to give me a call and let me know so that we can look into that. In the second question for emergency studies, that has been the notion around as we are transitioning out of the emergency studies and back to fully compliant studies, we are still performing the work. And so it was a requirement in statute also that was built in that as we return these emergency studies, which are only Minnesota name and date of birth during the time of the pandemic and peacetime emergency, that was limited to that information only. And so now we're moving back to full compliance where we're going to be getting FBI records and submitting those types of requests forward. And so as providers are resubmitting, they are resubmitting for full compliance with fingerprint-based background studies. So there is that additional cost.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't believe you asked 2 questions, Mr. Irvin, but you did it pretty quickly, and they were important questions. We thank you to the department and Ms. Davis for the presentation and answering questions. I found it very helpful.
Thank you.
And we're gonna move on just because we've got such a full slate here. The data committee subcommittee is going to go first. My understanding is Ms. Williamson is having Mr. Kammer do a presentation today, and I'll defer to him to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think a lot of what we're going to share coincides with Ms. Davis's report, but I'll just walk you through our brief slides. We put together just a few key pieces that we thought were interesting. Will, I'm actually going to share my slides if that's okay, so I can scroll through. Will that be acceptable?
Absolutely, Mr. Kammer. In fact, that's preferable.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's just walk through here really quick. As mentioned before, 2018, 2019 data, as we take a look, these are distinct counts. So this is all inclusive. And we just threw the numbers there, not going to go into detail there, just setting the pace. These would be those distinct count of persons. As Ms. Davis said, it's not surprising. These numbers are lower than the prior slide because people can have multiple, disqualifications and so forth. So just want to show you that. This will look very familiar to something that our subcommittee showed you a couple of weeks ago. And this is that breakdown of the disqualifications as well as disqualifications rescinded. We didn't have the rescindeds included last time, but this breaks down those data by race and ethnicity. And again, these are 2018, 2019. So as we go through, I just want to kind of have you burn this image into your mind as we break things down a few different ways. One of the pieces of data that was shared with us that I think really helps to articulate some of what we're talking about is we have to think individuals, these cases are complex. But in general, one way of looking at that is the number of disqualifying crimes and conduct. As you can see, overall, the vast majority have just one crime, but you can go all the way up to 10 and above, and you'll see those numbers go down and down. But it's just helpful to keep in context that there's complexity here. But where we want to spend just a little time for our primary points, and this is what coincides with Ms. Davis's presentation from earlier, is we took a look at 2019 in particular. A lot of our data are 2018 plus 2019. Just for simplicity's sake, I've thrown together a pie chart here for 2019. Again, these are our 4 severity breakdowns. We have the low, we have the medium in orange, we have the high in gray, and then we have the not applicable, each really with different outcomes. So, our data subcommittee was curious, what does this look like, as a whole? How many are low, how many are medium, high, and then the not applicable? Again, I'm a data person, so I can't give you all the ins and outs of what all of these mean. Ms. Davis did a good job explaining these. And if there's more questions, I anticipate she'll be able to help us out. But where our data subcommittee wanted to go is we, of course, have a great interest in some of the race ethnicity disparities looking through. So what I'm showing you here, again, is 2019 specific. So look at 2019 here. This is all the severities included. This would be not applicables. This would be high, medium, and low all together. And what I really encourage you to do is particularly take a look at the white individuals here, which are represented in green. And I want you to note how this changes and how the number of persons of color are impacted as we go higher and higher in severity. And that's certainly where we're seeing some of that disparity that's concerning. And we want to learn more about that. So again, these are all severities right here in this first pie chart. And then as we'll go low here, well, we'll see, white individuals higher, persons of color lower. But then as we go up and up in severity to medium, to high, and to not applicable, we certainly see some shifts there, which in fact are just, very concerning to us. What we heard Ms. Davis say today is that, it's a downstream. And, one of the questions our data subcommittee will be asking more about is just helping us to understand this, the downstream. Is there any interpretation that goes on there, or is it strictly all formulated and so forth? Because we're just, really concerned as we see disparities like this in this type of data. So those were the 2 key points our data subcommittee wanted to share. We've been enjoying looking through the data and trying to hone in on some points. And with that, that's all I have for this morning.
Thank you so much, Professor Kamer. I got kicked out some type of way, so I appreciate you stepping in. But Chair Geffen, yes, we are looking to, I'm not sure if Mr. Vogel had already mentioned or not, as I was kicked out, if we've received that 3rd data set. Mr. Vogel, if you hadn't spoke to that, if you could please.
Ms. Williamson, Mr. Chair, no, the data subcommittee has received 2 data sets so far, with the 3rd anticipated, but not yet arrived.
And if we could please identify how DHS has subtitled that 3rd set that they're working on.
Ms. Williamson, Mr. Chair, I think I might defer to the DHS members in the call with what they're planning on including in that data set, if any of them happen to know off the top of their heads. Yes.
So we did that was actually in that presentation that we just shared. If you pulled up those slides, I think it was with the 2nd slide. So we have shared that information about what we're working on. And so that's, so if we go to the 2nd slide here, this is the stuff that we're working on pulling. And so kind of digging into more of that data about the conduct and stuff related to those disqualifications.
Does the department have like an estimated time that it would provide, just because we are running up pretty quickly on some deadlines with the legislative mandates for our report. Any idea when the data subcommittee will receive it?
Mr. Chair, I believe we're pretty close on that third one. I don't want to give you a firm number here without without 100% confidence. But I do know that it does take some time for us to pull these data sets together. So we appreciate your patience. We do know that the task force has a report coming up in March, and so working to get you all as much as we can, as quickly as we can.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the presenters or the data subcommittee in general? And maybe I'll just would ask a quick question, Mr. Gammer. Are the numbers with DHS disqualifications pretty consistent with, specifically with sort of the racial breakdown, consistent with criminal justice records in the state? There was I think what the department talked about being downstream. I mean, they're not the ones adjudicating individuals guilty of anything, but are the numbers consistent?
Yes, and I think that we had showed, our vice chair showed a slide last time. I was going to see if I could pull it up. One of the things that we did just to take a look was take a look at Department of Corrections population as compared to disqualifying determination. So let me just show you this here. I'm pulling up a different presentation. Yeah, this is what we took a look at so as you take a look, a little bit of variation there, but overall we're seeing some consistency. This is not by all means the definitive way to compare, but it's similar. So not seeing a whole lot that surprised us in that regard.
Thank you.
You're
Other
welcome.
questions? I have another question then. Oh, Mr.
Yeah.
Tatum, please.
No, Chair, I didn't have a question. I just want to say they did a good job. It was real understandable, so yeah.
Yeah, and Mr. Vogel, are these slideshows and data sets available on the website at this time?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The slideshows will be on the meetings tab for this regular task force meeting. The data sets are at present on the subcommittee meeting tab for the data subcommittee meetings. If you'd like, I could also send those out to the members via email.
I think that always makes sense. The easier, the better. And there is one question I think I have for data sets moving forward to the data subcommittee. When we looked at the department's presentation, there was that 37% that were allowed to continue to work with supervision. Has the data subcommittee asked to see of that 37%, what is the percentage of individuals who requested a set aside and were approved? And my thought on that is it an unnecessary step to make people go through reconsideration when we know there's a very high likelihood of success? So just something, I don't know if that had been asked, but I'd be interested in it.
Yes, Chair,
please, Ms. Williamson.
Yes, that's a great question. We have with the data subcommittee, we have a working document of questions that we gathered together. We're really trying to be duteous in making sure that we're not adding on more requests as we're yet waiting to receive what has already been requested, right? And DHS has told us several times about their workforce levels and things of that nature. So, but that's a very great question that we'll make sure to have included with the other questions that we have as well.
I'll defer to the data subcommittee. I just was interested. And so we're going to move on. Our time is already running short a little bit. Ms. Dawson, at this time, could you give us an update from the remedies subcommittee? And thank you. Nice to see you, Ms. Dawson.
Nice to see you. Yes, I apologize. I've had my video off, multitasking a little bit today. So I'll be pretty brief. I think the remedies subcommittee, we've had a number of very good conversations, very productive conversations. We have really been focusing I understand the data subcommittee has been collecting a lot of very valuable data. We have focused our efforts a little bit more on looking at other states' statutes, how other states seem to be handle disqualifications. And I think that has provided us with some insight just as far as kind of what other states, especially states around us, are doing, what kind of gives us some ideas. We've identified just through all of our conversations what we'd call three main buckets. It's kind of how we've been referring to them. But the first main topic that we are looking at is the preponderance of the evidence standard. So right now, as we've all talked about before, our statute looks at more than just convictions. So we are really taking a look at that preponderance of the evidence standard, gathering data on that, how the Department of Human Services actually handles those. Right now, it seems to be more based on sort of internal policies, which I think are great, but of course can change. And so there's a concern with that. The next piece that we are really looking at is an actual permanent bar, and whether there should be a permanent bar or some sort of, even if there is a permanent bar, some sort of an opportunity for someone to have a review. And so that is one piece that we are looking at. The final kind of bucket piece that we're looking at is actually quite large, and that's really just the appeal process itself. How quickly things get turned around, whether it's really user friendly, who actually takes a look at it, who's even entitled to have kind of that face-to-face contact. And I think one thing we're really looking at, along with that's also the set aside, is really looking at who gets a hearing. Is there any way to try to add some sort of a human element to this where people can actually be reviewed individually? And so we're really looking at that big kind of overarching the process itself. So those are our three main buckets. I think that our subcommittee has really had a lot of conversations on this, and our plan for our next meeting is to actually really narrow down and to start prepare what our recommendations will be for this larger group. So I would anticipate maybe not having all of the language entirely agreed upon by our next meeting, but I think we are definitely making progress, and we're close to a point where, like I said, we'll be coming back with actual recommendations.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dawson. And I'll open it now up to questions or certainly comments too from other members of the Remedy Subcommittee who want to express any opinion they might have. Well, Ms. Dawson, you hit a home run. Nobody has any questions. You just nailed it perfectly. It was crystal clear. And we're going to move now on to
actually, Ms. Kaser may have a question.
Oh, Ms. Kaser, we lost the
coming in the
game.
buzzer. Thank you,
Please, Ms. Kaser.
Just curious, and maybe this is too long of a question knowing our time, but are you finding distinct differences in the information that you've gathered from other states on how they are doing background studies?
Yeah, I mean, we are, what I can say is Minnesota is at least sort of what we've collected so far. And of course, we're kind of compiling all of this research. And I think at some point, and maybe that's hopefully by the next meeting, we can present more on the actual research itself. But Minnesota's statutory scheme of the permanent 15-10-7 is very unique. Some of the states we're seeing really follow more the Adam Walsh background study of the permanent and the 5-year. The other piece is that there are a number of other statutes that actually allow for, even for a permanent bar, some sort of discretion to the department to really actually, again, looking at, has someone been rehabilitated? Can someone actually serve whatever portion of the public they're going to be serving? The other really one that we're seeing that I think has been coming in pretty unanimous, or maybe almost unanimous, but pretty consistent, is that other states really seem to be using simply a conviction standard. So we're not seeing the preponderance of the evidence standard. And so that, I think, has for sure been the biggest piece that seems to be pretty consistent.
Thank you, Ms. Kaser. Thank you, Ms. Dawson. We're going to move on now just briefly to the disqualification subcommittee, and similar to the remedies subcommittee, we're starting to develop some themes, but not any specific language. And some of the themes include the subcommittee's concern with the use of all juvenile records, and how under the disqualification statute, they're really used pretty similarly to adult records, and that some of those juvenile records, really they're different, and juveniles are different. And that while some juvenile records might be very important for public safety, not all of them are relevant in the public safety analysis. Certainly no consensus with where that line's drawn, but starting to identify that as a theme. Another theme is looking at the disqualification statute's use, and this overlaps with remedies, the 7, 15, 7, 10, and 15 and permanent bar, that for some of those, they're too long. We have had discussions about the 5th degree possession drug cases, including which are 15-year disqualification, that if an individual is in active recovery, might that be a little bit too long? And that there are people that are disqualified in those periods that don't pose a risk of harm to individuals. Also looking at trying to integrate more science and recidivism rates into the disqualification statute, and whether or not though that data could be used a little bit more thoughtfully, both with juveniles and the brain science, and with just, again, recidivism rates and how those apply to public safety. And maybe the last one, we've had discussions about that the disqualification statute includes some offenses that don't really relate to public safety. We don't have a recommendation. We haven't done all the work to go through everyone, but there has been discussion about whether or not all those listed really apply to public safety. Some of the offenses might be crimes of poverty or other instances that don't impact services directly. One last thing, and Judge Kulik raised this. So under our current statute, all the timelines begin, all the waiting periods begin once you've completed your probationary period. And that during COVID, we've had these extended periods of no trials, which really extends a person's waiting period significantly. And maybe start looking at it, whether or not using for and I think this was Mr. Page's idea, for non-prison sentence cases, maybe using the time of conviction as opposed to release of probation as when the timeline or the clock starts to run. I certainly want to open it up to other members of the remedies group, of the disqualification group, if they felt that I've misrepresented or said something online, and open it up to questions as well, if anybody has any. Look at that. That's how you do it. That's a no-hitter right there. Perfect game. All answered. Perfect. And that leads us to, I think, thankfully, we have some time to have an important discussion. Mr. Vogel, could you, and we're going to get to Mr. Tatum in a few minutes, but it's important, I think, that we have a discussion about what we need to do moving forward now. We're getting close to our next fall meeting. We're going to need to do some voting. We're going to need to vote on some of the recommendations. Mr. Vogel, could you just lead us in a discussion, sort of next steps for this group?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So the statute that set up the task force calls for the task force to turn in 2 reports to the legislature. There'll be the final report, which off the top of my head is due December 16th of 2022. But an interim report is due on March 1st of 2022, which is a date that is looming. The statutory language is very broad on what this interim report will consist of, simply that it needs to happen. And so as I'm hearing these discussions, and as I, am drafting some language that I'll be suggesting to the members for the report, it seems like it might be fruitful for the members to discuss what they'd like to what they'd like to report on. The report will contain the report of your activities, the minutes of your meetings, summaries of the meetings, that sort of thing. But for example, with these buckets, as Miss Dawson put it, are you interested in having those in the report, or are you more interested in simply reporting that that your work is proceeding and that you'll provide more specific recommendations at the next report? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's essentially what I'm thinking on my end as I'm looking at that March 1st date.
I think Representative Mueller has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And I would encourage Representative Robbins too to chime in here if she disagrees or agrees with me. But I guess I would say that given the timing of when the report's due and where we are in the legislative process, even though we just started session, many of the committees have already got, looking ahead at what their schedules are until our deadlines, which are in March, for having a first hearing. Many of the bills that are going to be heard this year already have been drafted, are in the drafting process. So I don't think it's very realistic that there's any legislation that's going to come out of our work here right now this year. And I think for purposes of everybody's time and the continued work that we're going to be doing after that initial report, even just something very brief like this, these are the committees, here's who's on it, this is what we're working on, I think is really all you need to do, kind of a broad overview, and not necessarily any recommendations at this point.
Thank you very much, Representative Mueller. And I see Ms. Dawson's hand up, but I do want to open this up to Representative Robbins if she had any comments on that.
I fully concur with Representative Mueller. I think that's the best course of action. And I do think that that is the expectation of the legislature. They knew we didn't have a lot of time to get deep in the weeds. And I think the full report due at the second deadline is when they will really be expecting concrete recommendations.
And I think both representatives, I think that's something quite honestly we needed to hear. And I want to remind the task force in general about Joanna Woolman's discussion last time, 2 times ago, I don't recall, but talking about this dedication. This can be a bit of a long haul, and we should not be deterred by not having completed anything yet, because I think we're at a point where we're all kind of asking the right questions and getting to a place that makes sense. So that's disheartening to me one bit. Ms. Dawson, I know you had your hand up and you seem to have vanished on me, but please, whatever.
No, and I think that's helpful to hear, because I think at least the remedies subcommittee, we were not at a point where we were going to be ready to propose any sort of actual change in the legislation, but definitely wanting to start even that when we do get to that point. Kind of this first round is really, what are we seeing? What are our concerns? What do we think the big overarching themes are, to then ultimately support whatever any proposed legislative changes may be.
Would it be valuable, and I would certainly lean on the recommendations of those more familiar with the process, would it be helpful for each of the subcommittees to put something together to sort of give an overview to Mr. Vogel about specifically what that subcommittee is looking at to include it in the report, or is that unnecessary? Yes, Representative Mueller, please.
Yeah, I think you could. I mean, but something just very general and very broad is fine. I don't think you'd have to go into the weeds or spend a lot of time on that. Just very general, broad overviews would be the most helpful.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense to me. Mr. Page.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to suggest something similar, maybe a few sentence overview of what each committee is doing, as has been kind of presented here. I think to the extent that anyone not involved in this group, legislator or otherwise, is watching to see what this group is doing, it would be good for transparency's sake for them to see what has been discussed, the directions that we are leaning, or the areas that we've been discussing, in case someone is watching and wants to offer additional input, which would, I think, benefit all of our subcommittees and the task force as a whole.
And then maybe we'll just, I thank you so much, Mr. Page, and I agree. I think I would like to task each of the subcommittee chairs to maybe just create a brief narrative, maybe vet it out with the subcommittee members and get it to Mr. Vogel. And so he can kind of work with that. Does anybody have a problem with that moving forward? Why don't we do that then? Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Vogel?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. That will be very helpful.
Okay. And I think we're gonna end now with Mr. Tatum, who's been a valued member of this task force for a long time, and he has been brave enough to agree to tell a little bit of his story with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to him. And I really appreciate you, Mr. Tatum, your bravery and your willingness to talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chair Geffen. My name is DeJuan Tatum. I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means is I still have urges, but I don't act on them. My life is quite different right now. The benefits of recovery have been huge. I'll get to that in the end. But we'll start with some significant events in my life. What brought me where I am today, where I was. Where I'm a little nervous, but I got it. I was born in Columbia, Louisiana, 1975. Columbia, Louisiana is really small. It's like you close your eyes and meditate or something, you'll drive right through it. It's that small. Gravel roads, church at the end of the gravel roads. It's right out close to Monroe, Shreveport area. Significant events let me see here. My earliest events I remember is living in a small house. It was like a 1-bedroom with a steel stove, you know, those real steel, the real old steel ones. Like 7, 8 of us in the house. My mother, Mary Tatum, Dorothy, these are all my sisters. I mean, my mother's sisters, Dorothy, Annie, and my mother, and I said my mother, and my brother, my older brother, John, and my cousin, Randy, like my closest cousin. And we all lived in this one small little shack house, little wood house. We took baths. It's crazy. We took baths in a baby, you know, those small little baby little things. We didn't even have no working water, none of that in the house. So we had to get water. But what I remember about chemical uses early, my mother would be gone, leave us, me, my brother, and Dorothy would be gone with my mom. They liked to go to the bars and drink, you know, so alcohol, I remember that at a very early age. I was 3, 4 years old. My grandma would leave us at the bar for my mother to come get us. Like, you're not gonna leave me with your kids. Everybody knew everybody in town. So so it was kind of funny. I moved to Minnesota in 1981. I was around 5 years old, 6 years old, somewhere around there. Lived in North Minneapolis, and they were called the projects back there. Now it's off Olson over by Summit. The real old, around 81, 82-ish. My mother and stepfather, my earliest, I left that out. My mother and my real father, we were never, no connection from the beginning. Knew who he was, but there was no connection. So my mother, she got with this guy. His name was Charles Williams. He became to be my stepfather. They moved here to Minnesota. My Uncle Rick was here. Like I said, we moved in 81, 83, somewhere around in that range. I just can't figure it out correctly yet. They would host parties. They'd host parties, sell marijuana. We came here. That's what my mother and them did, and my stepfather. They came here. They had parties, sold marijuana. So I remember marijuana at an early age as well. I tried, you know, I used kids they see what adults doing, and I would try it, you know, just, so I knew what they were doing early. So drugs changed then, you know, their drug uses changed. They were introduced to freebasing, it really changed a lot. Marijuana was bad. Still was able to take care of their family and kids and things of that nature. But once they got introduced to freebasing, a lot of things changed. Their behavior changed. Attention, to detail with kids and stuff. All of those things changed. By the time I turned 10 years old, they were like full-blown addiction. In and out of police were coming in and out of our house. My sister, she was born. My stepfather, we never had any kind of relationship. It was only when I did something bad. My older brother got involved in gangs. He was 5 years older than me, so I was like about nine. My brother probably was about 15 or 16, involved in gangs. Whoever was in charge of the neighborhood at the time got involved. It was like vice lords or something back then. They would let me go to the store for them. My mother was getting high, so we never really had any type of money or any new things because of drugs usage. So I adapted to the guys that were selling drugs in the neighborhood. They knew my family, knew my brother, so I would go to the store for them, things like that. So, and I would learn little things like that that were important in that setting, in that environment. Money, that was the most important thing. Don't trust the police. Don't know why, but don't trust them. So I already had it embedded in my head that it's us against them. Don't know why, but this is what they're telling me. And I respect these people. They're taking care of me. And so that went on for a few years, maybe 6-7 years. I didn't catch on to drug usage, but I was more of a criminal. I like to think like criminals did. I was young, so I wanted to be like these guys. I looked up to these guys selling drugs, guys that rob people, guys that, womanizers. These guys were real important figures in my life. So I picked up manipulation and conning very early. Before addiction, I was more of a criminal. So I left North Minneapolis. It had to be 1 second here. We left North Minneapolis, moved to South Minneapolis, and my first crime I committed was I was 12. I was 12. We broke into this juice factory, stole a bunch of juice. Stupid, but did it a couple times, got caught by the police, and I still remember that dog to this day. He had a really big police dog. And he like, you run right now, I'm gonna let this dog out. So I just stood there, they took me home. There was no consequences behind it. He talked to me, put me in the front seat with him, had that big bear in the back seat, It was a good experience with him though. It changed my perspective, my perspective of what I was being taught about police, and had him, show me something else than what I wasn't seeing. So that was something significant in my life too. Went home, no consequences on anything, nothing changed. My mother, I'm still getting high, in and out of St. Joe's. So I came accustomed to in and out of there. Raised. I almost got adopted when I was 12 years old. My mother, they didn't contest it, didn't come to St. Joe's a lot to really keep up with what's going on with me. And I almost got adopted by a white family. It was crazy. She was nice too. I still remember her, Nancy Egg, but I'm like, I don't know if I really wanted to, it was a good life. She had she was a pretty rich woman, seriously. And she took care of me, showed me different lifestyle, just being around her. It was cool. And she wanted to adopt me. My mother wasn't really contesting it, but I kept running away. I was being nice over there, but I was truly addicted to chaos and just seeing all the, the chaotic things going on in life. 16, I committed my second crime, real crime. I was selling drugs downtown. Sold drugs to a narc agent, ran from them. They didn't find any drugs, ended up going to jail. They found all the money on me. That was the first time I went to county. I was 16, went to county homeschool. no visits from family. It really wasn't, you know, anything positive coming from family anyway at the time. So my brother, I believe he was in Red Wing. My older brother was involved in gangs. It was just a normal thing. My mother and them didn't come see me. I still got visits from Nancy. She'd come see me. She'd take me out on like weekend visits and stuff like that. And I just had been I was too embedded, and, you know, I just couldn't really connect to that because I was really addicted to the chaos and what came along with the criminal lifestyle, you know, at a young age. I stayed in there they gave me 9 to 16 months in the county home school. I learned about horses, how to ride horses. It was a wonderful thing though, you know, it was a benefit for me, like being in these places, you know. It was just like, how can I say, I don't have to portray or how to not worrying about being a victim, you know, always putting this portrayal up, and it gave me a chance to actually be a kid. And I actually, I enjoyed those times learning how to ride. I still know how to ride horses to this day because of that, you know. But I still have my influences though, the friends that I like to hang around with and what was important to me, you know. I met one of my closest friends in county home school, joined the gang while I was there, got out of county home school. And I didn't really, you know, that really wasn't important to me. You know, I liked those, but I got back to what was going on. I was homeless at the time, got out of there. My stepfather had got sober, and he left my mother because my mother was still getting high. And things kind of got changed for the worse for her. You know, she lost her place. I wasn't really staying with her anyway. So I was homeless. Yeah, when I got out of there. So the gang became part of my family. Well, mostly all of my family. I was sleeping on people's couches, all of my friends' couches. Where we at here? Okay, like I said, living in poverty and acceptance of it. You know, this is what it is. This is my lifestyle. Like I said, joined the gang, homelessness, sleeping on couches. In 1995, I haven't really disclosed to y'all like the type of crimes we were doing. We were doing robberies. We would rob people. This is the people where I was. Yeah, so they were serious criminals. It wasn't like either you were a victim or a victimizer. The guys that I were around, you couldn't be like soft and stuff. Like you'd get treated bad. So I would always portray this image of a tough guy, which really wasn't me, but I wasn't afraid, you know, but I just didn't want to do certain things that I seen. You know, I've seen some, yeah. In 1995, I was charged with first-degree murder. I sat down there 11 months. Like I said, these are type of crimes that you see, you be around, and yeah. I was acquitted. I went through the trial. I knew who did it, but it was just like, what can I do? You know, so I sat there, I'm like, I know it ain't me. So I went through the trial, sat down on 11 months, went to trial with a public defender and got found not guilty, went on the stand, all of it. Yeah, it took 6 days to deliberate. And yeah, and things did not change because my brain wasn't fully developed as to comprehend the severity level of what was going on right now. You know, now that I think back to it, I'm like, God is good, you know. I didn't add that part in there too. Spirituality was like embedded into me at a young age, 3 to 5 with my grandmother. And so, God was looking over me, you know. I didn't change anything when I got out. You know, I was looked at like a hero on the criminal side. You know, you didn't snitch, you got out of this, blah, 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 this and that. And it was, you know, it became worse. The next thing you know, not the next thing you know, things went along. I still, you know, I wasn't really, how could I say? Yes, I was, to be honest. Yes, I was still involved. Things didn't really change yet. I hadn't really, you know, taken it in fully of how important things are. Like there ain't no coming back with death. You know, I didn't have that concept in my mind. You know, once you're dead, you're gone. I didn't understand that yet. so I continued to commit crimes. Yeah, homeless. In 1997, I committed a robbery of another gang member. I took his drugs. He was in the same area as me. He knew he wasn't supposed to be over there. We had an understanding, so he told the police, and the police, they came and just took me off the streets like a day later. They seen me, but they didn't say anything because I knew the police over there. You know, they see us every day. And then they came back and they picked me up and they charged me with it. They charged me with what was it? Attempted ag robbery. No, it started out at robbery. Then they said attempted ag robbery because I guess he didn't come to court or whatever happened with that. And I ended up pleading to something with a public defender, not really paying attention, bailed out, not really paying attention to how important it was. I committed the crime though. You know, I committed, so I take full ownership of it. But what was important, significant about this is that when I went to prison, that's when things started to actually really started to kick in. I was
Mr. Tatum, I hate to interrupt you, and I just want to note that we're technically out of time, and I'm very interested in continuing. We're going to continue to hear what you have to say because it's so wonderful to hear your story. And so you're going to be able to continue. I know that some people, if just so you know, if somebody actually clicks off or something, okay, it's just a timing issue. Please continue, and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm finna get it. Yep. Okay, so I went to prison the first time in 1997. I was 20 at the time, 19 or 20. Go in there. They say I have a mandate for treatment. I'm like, treatment for what? You know. So I had to go to Triad in there. You know, I was in Lino Lakes. They sent me to Lino. I went to whatever the process to get past that. Went to Lino Lakes. Went to Triad. You had to complete this treatment, and I'm like, I ain't doing no treatment. They're like, you get out early. I'm like, okay, what I got to do? You know, so you can go to work release, and they telling me all these wonderful things. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I'll do that. Okay, so I went in there, and I'm like, and it just wasn't like, I'm like, oh yeah, this is not for me. They're talking about feelings and all this other shit, and you're dealing with it, and you have to work through things, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's gonna be horrible. Calm down. This is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Well, anyway, but I went through the program, and I'm like, I got to get through it though. What I got to do. So I did everything they told me to do. And I just started working through it and stayed away from the bad influences. Hey, calm down. Sorry about this, guys. I worked through the, I did the steps and ended up being the chair on the NA meetings. And, it was just a wonderful thing. I learned a lot of stuff in there, but I was all doing it just to get through the program. I wasn't doing it to change anything, but change had happened. We're doing the work, and it wasn't the same for me no more. When I went back to the community, I was afraid now. I was afraid because of all the knowledge I had picked up in there, and it was just like horrible for me. I became an addict, an alcoholic, because of where my brain was now. I didn't know what was going on, crying by myself sometimes, and something was wrong with me. I was changing. I wasn't, I had learned something that could unlock me at the time, so I wasn't trying to learn it, but I learned it. But change started to happen, but it came the wrong way because I didn't reach out. I wasn't working with people, and and I was trying to just be who I was before, and so I became an alcoholic, and I became committing multiple DWIs, and I just didn't see that as a committing a crime because you're around people that's ain't no telling what the hell they're doing. So you're committing a DWI, that is not a crime, to me in my mind. Because of the standards of what's around me, and they just kept adding up. Then I ended up going back to prison again and actually started working it, working these steps, like I'm going to give this a chance and figure out how I'm going to make this work out. And this is where I am now. And I went to prison. I went to the boot camp program, went through it with flying colors because I was dedicated, and came out. And this is where I am now from 2016, I worked with it, it was a process. It took me like 10 years to actually change, that personality. Oh my goodness. It was horrible for me, it was a big process for me. But after 2016 got out, been working with it, figured out what can I do for myself to, so I can make some, you know, a life for myself and actually be working in that areas. You know, Doc told me, a guy from MCTC, like, won't you try to join our program? You know, so I'm like, yeah, I'll try it. Like, took the background check, passed it, you know, working by the supervision, you're good. So that's where I started from. You know, I was naive, didn't know what was going on, but I'm like, I wanted better than what I was doing. I'm like, I don't want to be out here like this. And I just got tired of it. You know, I'm like, yeah, this is not who I am anyway. You know, I was betraying as the victimizer because I didn't want to become a victim, you know, and that's just not who I was, you know. And spirituality it helped a lot to me going in there too, because I always wanted to read the Bible, you know. I don't know why. You know, I'd read it front to back. I probably read it 5 or 6 times, front to back, just read the whole Bible. You know, and that's what keeps me grounded today. Spirituality, reading every day, and just staying in reality, staying in the moment, you know, because knowing anytime something could happen, you know, so I try to keep myself reinforced, you know, every day, living in it, recovery, just talking about it every day. Some, you know, maybe not even really dealing with it with myself, but always living in it, you know, existing in recovery, you know, advocating for others and trying to promote hope. And that's what's been, you know, changing me, you know, and saving my life. Because I know if I didn't have this, I know where I would be at, you know, instinctive drift. You go right back to what's, you know, what you have, you know. Yeah, my life's wonderful now. You know, I talk to judges on a regular, you know, it's just a crazy thing though. You do the work, you know, the work was the most important piece to it. It's the work. You know, you can talk about what you're going to do or we're going to make this, but actually you're doing it. It changes you. It changed me. I know it has, you know, and actually being able to, you know, doing the work and actually receiving recognition behind it and not really worrying about what somebody else is going to say or think about you. That's the most I had to get to there, you know, the confidence in the inadequacy and letting that go, like whatever, you know, and it took some time, but no, I feel like I'm there now, you know, to be able to talk to you. You guys are all white people with them, all y'all, I used to be afraid of y'all, you know, like, man, they're gonna judge me, they're not gonna accept me. And I don't even care about that no more, you know, it's gone, you know. Yeah, the work. Yep. And with that, I know y'all got more stuff to do when you listening to me.
No, that is, I appreciate you and compliment your recovery. Credits to you. And thank you for being here, because your experiences and what you've gone through help guide us in ways that the rest of us can't know. So I want you to know that we appreciate you. We appreciate your change, and we appreciate you being here. It means a lot.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. Thank you, Chair. Yeah,
thank you to Mr. Tatum. And I think, you know, nothing could follow that except an adjournment. So I thank everybody and thank you all. And we will see you all soon.